Good morning. My name is Ty Carey. I'm the editor of the Westmeath Independent, and you're very welcome to this live webinar hosted by Athlone Chamber of Commerce in association with Athlone Town Centre. The theme for today's webinar, it's Our Streets, Let's Talk. It's the first in a series of 3 webinars designed to initiate a discussion as to the future of certain Athlone streets. Today we're focusing on Church Street, Northgate Street, Mardyke Street and Sean Costello Street. We have an expert panel here joining us this morning who will give their views on, I suppose, the present situation and plans for the future. Those of you joining us live are very welcome and indeed invited to submit questions via the chat function, and we'll endeavour to get to a broad representative sample of those questions throughout the rest of this webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for subsequent viewing. So we'll get straight into it. Our panel today includes Andrew Carberry, who's a Director of Power Property, Tony Johnston, Head of Department of Hospitality, Tourism and Leisure Studies at TUS Midlands, Cataldas Harton, Senior Planner with Westmeath County Council, and Jerry McInerney, CEO of Athlone Chamber of Commerce. To start proceedings, I'll invite each of the panelists to give a short introduction to themselves and their area of expertise, and we'll commence with Andrew Carberry.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tig. Andrew Carberry, as Tig said, is my name. I'm a Director of Power Property, consultants in property, commercial property primarily, based in Athlone, Limerick and Galway. My area of expertise is commercial property, and I grew up with retail warehousing and shopping centres primarily. So I have a lot of experience going back to the Celtic Tiger era of development, where we saw a lot of retail parks and shopping centres developed all over the country. Since then, I suppose we're dealing with different issues. Since the crash, we haven't seen so much development, but we've been dealing with the fallout from that and firefighting in the initial years post the crash, and now driving on with a growing economy that's been interrupted by COVID. As by way of background, our practice is very much a general practice. So we're involved in every area of commercial property, not only agency or commercial consultancy, but also rating, CPO. We would also be involved in rent reviews and lease renewals. So it's a broad spectrum of work, and we've been involved with everything from acquisitions of retail property, commercial property, office property, to lettings and sales. My interest here, I suppose, in this webinar is for stakeholders in property, property owners, property occupiers, and to try and represent those in terms of this discussion. So I look forward to engaging with the panel throughout the next hour.
Thank you, Andrew, for that. I'll now ask Anthony Johnston to introduce himself.
Thank you, Tig, and thank you, Andrew. My name is Tony Johnston. I'm Head of Department of Hospitality, Tourism and Leisure Studies in TUS, formerly known, of course, as AIT up until the 1st of October this year. So we're now a university. We have approximately 6,000 students studying here in the Athlone campus, and I look after the Department of Hospitality, Tourism and Leisure. Our department runs programs on the academic framework of qualifications going from level 6, which are primarily craft-based and skills-based courses, up to level 8, which is honours level degree, level 9, which is postgraduate, and level 10, which is PhD courses. So I have a broad interest in tourism, and I suppose the staff in my department would look at all aspects of tourism, from hotel management to culinary arts to interest in leisure and attractions as well. So I look at the town, I suppose, for the purposes of this webinar through the lens of tourism, through the lens of leisure, hospitality, and connected industries such as retail as well. But I'm also here representing the university, I suppose, and what the recent designation as TUS means for the town of Athlone, and in particular the streets in focus today. Thanks, Tig.
Thank you, Tony. Cataldas Harton is Senior Planner with Westmeath County Council. Cataldas, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, everyone. As Tig said, I'm Cataldas Harton. I'm the Senior Planner with Westmeath County Council. I have a number of years' experience in the Irish public sector at local and regional level, And prior to joining Westmeath, I worked across a number of local authorities in Longford, Laois, Meath, Fingal, and the Midlands Regional Assembly. So I've worked across all aspects of the planning field and was responsible for delivery of a number of innovative projects and strategies, including high-profile regeneration initiatives. I've responsibility for all functions of the planning department, and that includes planning for future growth and employment. And I'm also a member of the Council's Regeneration Advisory Group. My interest is in strategic planning and the formation of strategies that ensure that the right development happens in the right place at the right time, benefiting communities and the economy. Now, these strategies play a critical role in identifying what development is needed, where, and with a focus on areas such as social, economic, environmental, and cultural development. And these are all very important in creating attractive places. In terms of today's webinar, my interest in this area is to engage with all our stakeholders to get an understanding of their needs in order to inform future planning strategies for Athlone, and in particular the upcoming urban area plan, which will be developed jointly with Roscommon County Council.
Thank you, Cataldas. And finally, Jerry McInerney.
Thanks, Ty. Jerry McInerney, I'm CEO of Athlone Chamber. I suppose just a bit of background to these webinars. We would have a lot of members on these streets we're talking about this morning, but we would obviously have members all over the town. The feedback we've been getting from, say, retail is in some of the streets, footfall is falling. We would also get feedback from business that it's an ongoing challenge to attract staff to work in Athlone. And obviously with the new university town, what should it look like for a university? But based on all this feedback, we decided to run with these webinars. We're excited about them. Again, I'd like to thank all the panelists on behalf of Athlone Chamber, and I'd like to thank Athlone Town Centre for agreeing to sponsor the 3 webinars. And our aim on this is to start a conversation and see and come up with a vision for what all the stakeholders really would like our town to look like.
Thank you, Jerry. Again, I invite people to submit questions to our panel via the chat function. I suppose to assess to devise future plans for the streets that we're looking at today, Church Street, Northgate Street, Mardyke Street, and Sean Costello Street, we need, first of all, as a starting point, to have a current assessment of the state of play there. So, Andrew, I might turn to you to give us an assessment from a commercial property point of view as to demand in those streets at the moment, the sort of client mix you're seeing, and just a general state of play on the commercial properties in Church Street.
Yes, Ty. Well, what I would say is that the orientation of town centre is one that's changed over the last 25 years in Athlone, and that is evidenced in the demand that we see at the moment. So primarily we're looking at clients coming to us for space in Athlone Town Centre with high street representation, but they want to be between Athlone Town Centre and Golden Island. So the old traditional town centre has shifted from the streets that we're talking about today to between those two commercial entities. So we've seen a drop off in demand then for the likes of Church Street, Northgate Street, certainly would be less commercial, but again, we don't get calls for people wanting to occupy locations in Northgate Street. So it's a problem that we've created by development, by the town growing and expanding the town centre in the last 25 years has created an issue in terms of a vacuum along the streets that were traditional high streets in the town. So what we find is that commercial retailers will want to occupy space within the shopping centres because that's where the increased footfall is driven by their design. Shopping centres by their nature create a comfortable environment for people to spend time in and shop, and therefore increased dwell time. So when you have increased dwell time, generally means increased spend, and therefore the tendency is for people to gravitate towards those centres. Now, from occupier perspective, that means higher costs, higher rents, higher rates, things like that. But that's a balance that retailers will make, and generally will go for the old adage of location, 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 because that's mitigating risk from their perspective in terms of where they occupy space. As a result, I suppose, the streets that we're talking about have seen a decline in occupier demand from what I'd call AAA covenant tenants that would be national or international retailers, high quality service providers. And we're seeing an increase of service uses. So we're seeing a downgrading of the street from a retail perspective to a service-centered approach, which will see more opticians, barber shops. We've seen other services like tattoo shops emerge, healthcare like acupuncture and things like that. So these are filling the voids that are left by the retailers who have gravitated towards the main retail block. So it has had an impact over a period of 25 years or so, and that now is creating, I suppose, this discussion about how we move it on. A big step forward, of course, is the public enhancement works, and we might talk about that more later in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And that really brings us straight away to the nub of the matter, I suppose, as to what our vision for Church Street, Northgate Street and so forth is in the future. Is it a retail-based street? Is it a mix of uses? Is it a late night economy? And I'd be interested in hearing some of the panelists' views on that diversity of uses maybe that the streets could be home to in future.
I might come in on that, Tig, if that's okay. So I think as the town has evolved over the last couple of decades, as Andrew said, it's moved from, I suppose, a predominantly retail-driven town centre with some mixed use towards being a much more service-oriented streetscape along Church Street and so on. I think that's very reflective of what's happening with town centres around Ireland in general, but really across Western Europe. And obviously that's driven partly by COVID and by conflicts with online retail and so on as well. But I suppose it needs to be controlled. It needs to be managed so that there's an appeal with the town centre for all of the different types of users that come in. So as I said earlier, I suppose I'm representing the university, and we have, I suppose, 5,000 to 6,000 students coming in here on a weekly basis who make up a fairly significant part of the town's population during daytime hours. And there's a huge population there that can be brought into the town centre if we can make it easy enough to access from a mobility perspective, but also if it's appealing enough to bring them in. There's I suppose a serious customer base that could be exploited, you know. But I think we have to probably think about who these students are as well. They're not all your typical 18-year-old who comes from a local town in the Midlands who's come through the CAO and is now sort of the customer that we're traditionally used to. We have such a diversity of student in the college that we need to design these spaces that represent and appeal to these type of students as well. So we have mature students, we have our international students, and we've I think probably 60 or 70 different nationalities in the college at the moment. So we need to be very cognizant of that as well. I think more broadly, actually, in terms of town centre design and planning, it needs to be very much about the whole mix of people that want to use it. There is a demand for those service type environments that Andrew just spoke about, but how can we make it more appealing for the kind of rich population that exists in the university as well, I think is an important question to consider.
Thank you, Tony. Can you tell us what planning tools are available to local authorities to, let's say, curtail certain activities on a street and to positively encourage or positively discriminate for other activities? In other words, how can the local authorities help to create a future for Church Street in a certain direction?
Thanks, Tig. Well, I suppose there's two key tools available to the local authority. One is the development management process. It's the consideration of your planning application. Everyone will have some, I would believe, limited experience or engagement with that process at some stage in their life. And that's the process of considering a planning application for development in a particular area. And of course, that is based on the policy that has been developed for that area. So whatever town plan, local area plan, master plan, or in the case of Athlone, urban area plan that is in place at the time. And I suppose just as Anthony and Andrew touched on there, the need to look at a broad range of perspectives and to consider all the stakeholders in this. That's the next step, I suppose, that will come from this webinar. From the council's perspective, we will look to put a plan in place that will consider all of these issues. I suppose it's important to say at the outset that there probably isn't one silver bullet, you know, that fits all approaches. But what we look to do is we look to implement a strategic approach to town centre regeneration. We'll be looking at utilising existing buildings, unused land for development, and, you know, bringing that life back to the town, whether that be through new experiential uses, residential occupancy, and more compact growth. And I suppose the important part of this, and this is where this webinar is going to be very useful, is looking at the different areas of the town and how they, I suppose, how they function as one entity, as opposed to, you know, the individual streets, and then going into the individual areas, for example, Church Street, Mardyke Street, Connacht Street, and identifying the opportunities that are available in these individual areas, and then feeding that into a clear vision and building the consensus with the community and the stakeholders. So really, we're looking at, when we're delivering these plans and these tools, as you call them, we consider a wide range of aspects, you know, identifying that there may be constraints and different in terms of utilities and services, environment, connectivities, pedestrian access, and even the relationship of the areas to access with cars and public transport. So we will look at all of these things in the context of how we can improve them, how we can encourage regeneration, urbanize and activate our streets, you know, in terms of the shops and restaurants, what we could cater for in terms of bringing more students back into the town and really creating a vibrant environment. Again, even that housing offer in the town, you know, bringing life in, ensuring that there's passive surveillance at night. And you know, and that's all feeding into the mixed use, and then of course improving the transport linkages, the cycle linkages, the mobility, and making it easy and safe, you know, to cycle and walk in around these areas, and then obviously bringing in your green spaces. And then there's obviously the potential. We've got excellent natural amenities, tourism amenities in Athlone, and we'll be looking to see how we can integrate them and bring them into the town and take advantage of them. So, for example, there's a number of streets that lead down from Church Street onto the Strand there. There's potential to look at pedestrianising them, making them more attractive so that we can bring footfall down to those areas, and perhaps introducing a boardwalk along the Shannon, tying up into our other plans where we're introducing a cycle and pedestrian bridge across the Shannon as part of the Greenway, and really tying everything together. So, and again, as Andrew pointed out, a key component of that is the improvement of the public realm, and how that engages with the tourism assets that we have on offer. You know, making spaces that are safe, attractive, and where you want to sit down and enjoy and explore other areas. So really, you know, that's the main tools that are available to us, together with, and we'll probably touch on it later on, together with the funding aspects that are out there and available to the local authority. So in the area of urban regeneration development funds, ERDF funding, the work we're doing with Fáilte Ireland, and a range of fundings. But I would say again, the planning for this and the tools that we are available, they're only one piece of the jigsaw, and again, it needs buy-in for the communities, the stakeholders, and the people who are involved in Athlone to take ownership and champion their own improvements and their own direction for the town.
Okay, thank you. There's some very interesting points, and I would like to come back later to the issues of pedestrianisation and the boardwalk that you refer to. But firstly, I'd like to ask Jerry McInerney, as the voice of businesses in Athlone and businesses on Church Street and so forth, what is the feeling among businesses on Church Street at present, Northgate Street, Mardyke Street and so forth, as to the current situation and as to what they would like to see the street looking like in the future?
Yeah, well, obviously they would have concerns about footfall. The traffic is still an issue. I'm glad to hear Costello saying there about maybe looking at different ways of getting people into town. One suggestion I've heard a good bit is from Church Street. Going back to what Andrew said there, the town centre is between Golden Island and the town centre now. When they come out of the town centre, we need ways to get them to turn right instead of left. And last year, for example, the hospitality outdoor dining did well in Church Street in a very haphazard way. And I know a number of the hospitality people in Church Street have said, similar to other towns, can we not do a coordinated approach to outdoor dining. We have the wide footpaths in places. The canopy is unused area, so it would be very attractive if like outdoor dining is going to be here again this year or next year. Sorry, that would draw people to the streets, and obviously, is to get more footfall into the streets. I know I'm reassured of what Costello said there as well about the pedestrianisation of some of the side streets, and that would be positive. And I think
thank you.
one last thing, Ty, and again, it's the property owners will have to help themselves in some ways. The Tidy Towns do a great job in Athlone, and they compliment them on winning their gold medal. But the appearance of some of the buildings, especially on Church Street, is still an issue. Visually, they're just a lick of paint would do. And again, like there's good support there from the council with the shopfront enhancement scheme, but there is some work to be done on that as well.
Okay, thank you. Again, I suppose the motivation for these seminars was to try and help initiate a discussion to chart a future vision for the streets we're referring to. And I suppose any future vision has to be based on information and data. And Tony, you're very strong on that. You have a strong belief that we need to look at best practice elsewhere. We need to look at the data that's available and to utilise that in devising that future vision.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm not a planner. I think I'd like Cathal to speak to that side of the story here. But I think every decision about planning locally should be made on good evidence. You know, it should have the kind of different quantitative and qualitative data sets that we need to make good decisions. Whether it's I suppose fairly straightforward data to record around things like spend and visitor nights in the town and footfall and bed nights and so on. But also we should look at some of the barriers to access for the town centre as well. You know, what's stopping people coming into those streets, and some of it it's not rocket science. You know, I've spoken to tour guiding bus drivers around the country before who've told me they don't tend to stop in Athlone because it's not that easy to find a place to park a bus to access the very centre of the town. You know, so we just need, I think, to identify those sorts of pieces of data that are out there and make decisions around those where we can. In terms of looking at good practice, this is something that we're big believers of in the university. With my students, for example, who study culinary arts, we take our students every year to Parma in Italy to look at the prosciutto di Parma ham, the Parmesan cheese, Modena vinegar, and pasta production. It's a marvelous field trip, I have to say as well. It's, you know, what a great place to spend a week. But we do that with them because we believe that is the best international practice that they could possibly see. And they learn about food tourism, they learn about food production, and they learn about culinary skills. And they take some of those ideas back to their workplace. And that's really useful for them in terms of professional development. But what I'm getting to in this webinar is that I think we need some frameworks for ourselves, for decision makers, for planners, for the different stakeholders, so that we have a framework and a structure so that we can look at good practice internationally, which could benefit Athlone, whether it's that we go virtually on field trips to look at some maybe well-run tourism attraction towns in similar sized countries like Denmark or Austria or somewhere, or whether it's we even organize expertise from those towns to come and deliver some sessions or workshops with us. I think that would be a really good flow and exchange of knowledge, which could benefit areas like Northgate Street and Church Street. Because I suppose, you know, you were just talking about Northgate Street earlier, and I was thinking, you know, with the right public sector supports, with the right stakeholder buy-in, and with I suppose some degree of luck, it could go the way of Church Street and kind of be regenerated and, you know, have a pleasant urban streetscape and so on, and be reformed and so on. But equally, it has probably the potential or the danger to drift the other way and become more like Connacht Street and become, I suppose, even more empty and more devoid of demand. You know, so we need to, I think, take some steps to look at that good practice internationally and bring ideas back here as a fair old matter of urgency. You know, it should be a real priority for the town in the coming years.
Thank you. I don't intend to reopen the debate on one way on Orange Loop. through Church Street, but I do think it's important to look at how best to utilise the transport network we have at present, and no matter whatever future use of Church Street emerges, it's obviously important to bring people into the street, whether it be through pedestrian means or through vehicular means. Catalyst, maybe you could talk to us about future plans for Westmeath County Council to maybe augment the Orange Loop or to better utilize it. Do we need park and ride facilities? Do we need better integration of public transport in Athlone? Do we need to find ways of bringing people from the west side of Athlone into the town centre? Anecdotally, there's been lots of stories of people from West Athlone, South Roscommon, travelling to Roscommon town for retail rather than to Athlone. So just a general issue of transport and how that can be plugged in, shall we say, to Church Street.
Thanks, Tig. Yeah, at the moment, it's an issue that we're, it's to the forefront of our minds, and particularly in terms of informing any future strategy that we prepare for the area. We are engaged with Roscommon in the preparation of a local transport plan, which will assess, those infrastructural blockages, shall we call them, in terms of access, both to the current, to the town as it's currently operates, but also in terms of accessing future lands, whether that be for, housing, employment, or other uses, because we have a vision of Athlone growing to scale to fulfill its role as a regional centre, and without I suppose the proper planning in that area, we're just going to run into trouble. So it is an issue that we're looking at, but again, just to go back to Anthony's point, it's based on evidence, and that's what we're doing at the moment. We're compiling all the evidence, we're linking into the NTA strategies and their traffic modelling systems, and then we look at solutions in that regard. We also have an active travel team assembled, working very closely with the NTA, and they're doing a survey of all the strategic access routes coming into Athlone, and they'll be looking at key connections between areas. So, for example, from the university to the town, from major areas of employment and other major residential areas into the town centre itself. And we'll be looking to implement a programme of improvements in terms of cycle and pedestrian accessibility, ensuring that we can get in and out safely, and we can make that shift, in terms of I know we need to bring people in the car. It's not going to happen in the morning that we're going to move away from the car. So we need to look at, I suppose, an intermediary approach until such time as, we can get those really good public transport linkages in place, pedestrian and cycle linkages, and make it an attractive environment to come into, whether that be by foot or to different areas, such as people coming in by way of park and ride, because I don't think anybody would advocate a town, or anybody would want to go back to the old system that was on Church Street, where it's dominated by traffic. You're taking your life in your hands to cross your road. So it's about improving that environment and, achieving a balance between the car and making something that's accessible, but also friendly and, pedestrian, with the pedestrian at the forefront. So I suppose that's the work that we're doing. That's what our strategies are for, and the input of people with experiences in the area, both traders, employers, and indeed the communities that are coming in and using it is very, very relevant in that regard to inform our strategies. So again, it will be a key consideration in any future plan.
We have a question there from in the chat there in relation to future plans for the pedestrianisation of Church Street itself. I know you refer to possible pedestrianisation of some of the side streets linking down to the River Shannon, but in terms of the main thoroughfare itself? Well,
look at what we will do as part of our plan is we look at all of these things, based on the evidence and based on the engagements, we'll identify solutions, and we'll put a strategy in place in terms of guiding future development. So at the moment, there's no preconceived plans for any of the streets.
Tig, if I could come in there just on a couple of points. There's an issue with Athlone in terms of geophysical issues, in that you look at the centre of town and try to assess where it is, and I'm not sure anyone can tell you exactly where the centre of town is, because if you walk from the bridge at Church Street Junction and all the way down to the end of Sean Costello Street, you're looking at about 800 metres. So we have an esker in the middle of town, and we fall away from that as we go towards the river. And so you don't have a traditional town centre that you might have in other similar sized towns such as Ennis or Tralee or Clonmel, to give a couple of examples. So we have a physical issue that is quite unique to Athlone, and that's something that we have to work with because it is as it is. But if we look at the issue about Roscommon, for example, which Jerry mentioned, or maybe you mentioned yourself in terms of people going from South Roscommon to there, it's pure convenience. And that is the key thing. With people will be motivated by convenience because they have busy lives and they need to get from A to B as quickly as possible. So what you have in Roscommon is an agglomeration of retail close by where they can move easily from one to the other. Whereas we kind of don't have that same physical infrastructure in Athlone, and we probably won't ever have. So what we need to look at is making it more convenient for people to get in and out quickly, but more amenable for people to spend more time in those central areas. And this is not something that's going to happen pretty quickly. We have to look at this. Obviously, there's an urgency in terms of the immediacy of Church Street and Northgate Street and Sean Costello Street. But it takes time for the works that have been done in the past year and that will be done in the next year for them to have an impact on the street. You have issues like leases and occupation and people there that won't change overnight. So you have to plan in the medium to long term. You can't just look at the short term thing. So maybe saying pedestrianisation is an option for Church Street. Well, we've made the first step on improving the public realm and widening the streetscape. And it is, as a user there every day, it's much better for pedestrians walking up and down that street now. But as units become available, you're going to see a change of user in that street over a period of time. And I believe that would be focused towards the service centre. And services are going to play an important role in the use mix of that town centre to create a longer dwell time and a more amenable place to do it. And one final point on that is, if we look at the positive outcomes from COVID and the situation that we found ourselves in, there was meaningful grants available for people to renovate their property or to do up their outside space to allow people to dwell outside and eat outside, whether that came from erecting canopies, heated environments for them to sit outside in the cold weather, which is an issue in Ireland. But retailers and occupiers of those buildings reacted positively to that. There hasn't been a great take-up of the business enhancement scheme. And I think maybe we could look at that in terms of the immediate impact of what happened with the COVID grants versus the lack of take-up of the shopfront enhancement scheme.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. If the street is to move towards a service-orientated offering, obviously tourists will be a large cohort to bring into that area. And obviously the biggest tourism attraction we have in Athlone is the River Shannon. But yet, as a town, we tend to turn our back on the river. In what way can the River Shannon and its beauty be better integrated into Church Street, Northgate Street, and the mix of uses that we're hoping to see in those streets?
I think there are barriers there to it at the moment. You know, they're probably both mental and physical barriers. It's a narrow area down at the Strand, as has been described before, and it's not particularly attractive for people to leave Church Street and walk down the side streets to the Shannon, especially when they're passing through cars and traffic as they go down. So I think that kind of needs to be looked at in some form or another. There also needs to be, I suppose, more than the river to attract them down there. You know, there needs to be, you know, different service spaces down there, whether it's cafes or entertainment or places to sit and view and so on. So some of this is I suppose, infrastructural solutions. But there also needs to be a cultural change too. I think if you compare public space in major European cities to public space in Irish cities, they're used very differently. We almost drive people out of public space by virtue of some of the layout and some of the decisions that we make. It would be very rare in Athlone, for example, that you would walk down the street and see, I suppose, quality musicians and busking happening to the extent that you might see it in other European towns of a similar size. And I think we need to create spaces for that kind of cultural arts, music activity to happen as well, so that there is a vibrancy and a life there, to make it them kind of appealing public spaces to sit in. By virtue of people spending more time there watching these different cultural activities, the river would be utilised more, and therefore, I suppose, Church Street would be as well. I think we need to look at that.
Catalyst, this brings me back to two of the points you raised earlier, the possible pedestrianisation of side streets bringing us down to the river, and also the boardwalk idea, which I think emerged from Council's waterfront strategy from 10, 15 years ago. It's interesting to see that that's still a potential development that the Council is considering.
Yeah, we prepared a very comprehensive waterfront strategy back in 2009, 2010. And a lot of, I suppose, we're implementing a number of the objectives that were set out in that, and a lot of them are still relevant. You know, and even in terms of Anthony's point in terms of best practice, you know, we would engage on an annual and I suppose a quarterly basis as professionals in the planning sector through our corporate body, the Irish Planning Institute, looking at best practice from other areas, both nationally and internationally. And you know, there is, you know, it's probably our biggest asset is the Shannon there, and we're currently carrying out a wayfinding strategy, which will hopefully help direct people through the town. It'll provide the connectivity between the two traditional retail areas that we spoke about earlier, but also directing people down to our tourism assets and the water. There is definitely potential to strengthen access along the banks of the waterfront, and as well to open up views from some of the restaurants and bars, you know, down around, I know it's maybe not this area, but around the left bank area. And again, you know, the work we're doing with Falls Ireland, branded signage and that type of material should assist in that area. There's also potential, you know, to ensure that there's mooring post jetties and other facilities available in the area, so it's an attractive place to come and stop and spend time. And we'll be looking at, you know, how we treat that water edge as part of our future plan. Also, I suppose there's interest now in, I suppose, how we take advantage of the water. Can we put services on the water? So, for example, you have restaurants along the quays in Dublin. So is that something we can do, and what infrastructure is required to do that? So these are all areas that we will be considering. And again, as Anthony said, there needs to perhaps be a focus on what entertainment, festivals, and other forms of gatherings that we can bring in, and that we can, you know, I suppose relate to this what is a unique asset that we have there in Athlone, you know. So maybe even fun fairs down around the water, new civic and amenity spaces. So these are all considerations that we'll be looking at, and we'll be putting together guidance for in terms of the future. And then I suppose, you know, it has to be delivered. There has to be the investment and the will from other providers there. You know, there needs to be, as pointed out, you know, you need to have services down there. You need to have your shops and restaurants and arts and crafts, and you know, it needs to be a holistic approach to the development of the area. So a piece of infrastructure by itself, while it can act as the catalyst for the future development, it isn't the end solution. But it's good, I suppose, to open up the conversation on the waterfront, and it would be interesting to get the wider public's views on what they see as their vision for the area and how they think it could be better utilised for the benefit of Athlone.
Thank you. One of the points raised by Tony earlier was our utilisation of public space, that we tend to be poor in that regard. And we have a question related to that. How do we improve on the plaza canopy space between Church Street and Athlone Town Centre? Is there a possibility of a weekly market going in this space or other location in the town centre? It is one of the few public spaces in the streets that we're talking about, and it's effectively a dead underused space. Has any of the panelists any thoughts on that matter?
I would tag on that. I suppose if you look at it, it depends. I don't know the nub of the idea or where it came from, but if we look at places we like to go to spend time on our own holidays or breaks or whatever, and we like that public engagement and the activity and the atmosphere, and I just think maybe of Quay Street in Galway as an example, where people sit outside and soak up the atmosphere, and it then creates vibrancy and activity. And again, I come back to dwell time, people spending longer time in the town centre, so they will spend their hard-earned cash locally while they're there. The difficulty with the canopy as it is located, it's a fantastic space, underutilised correctly, as you say. But what happens elsewhere is that the services that use that are located directly around it. So we don't have those services, apart from perhaps the little coffee shop that's directly beside it. We don't have those spaces right around that canopy. And on two sides, there is a street on one side and there's the old wall on the other side. So you don't have a natural plaza by design. It's just not possible in that location. But this is something that could happen either side of Church Street, for example. So while we focus on that piece of infrastructure because it's there, we need to think outside the box and say, okay, right, that's a good idea, just maybe not in the right location yet, or those uses haven't changed around it to maximize its potential. We now need to look at other locations and say, well, okay, would that work better? Maybe, and again, it'll come up in the new year, but the plaza around Main Street works better because of the type of uses that are around it. So, we just need to be conscious of that, and that will improve. If we get that right, it will improve the dwell time in the town centre, and people will spend more money as a result and enjoy their time spending and encourage them to come again. So that's the key thing. And the other thing is, why we look at the river as a magnet. I think more mooring points or berthings is critical, because I look out my back window in my office every day and I see the boats going up and down the river, and they tend to just drive through. They're going through and they're not stopping off in the volume that we think they should stop off. And that's because there isn't really spaces for them to stop. It's not easy for them to stop. They come through the lock, they spend 20 minutes there, and then they're heading on up into the lake. So we have to make it easier for those people to utilize what we have in the town centre. But certainly the plaza, and I agree with Tony's point about busking and vibrancy and activities around those spots, that should be actively encouraged to create that ambience and atmosphere that we want to spend time in.
Thank you. Your point in relation to moorings and jetties is echoed by one of our chat comments there, asking for that they would love to see more jetty and mooring facilities on the Strand. Jerry, I believe the Chamber has some thoughts in relation to better use of some of the public spaces around the neighbourhood we're referring to.
Well, I suppose a comment was made there. We're involved in an Athlone food circle, which is recently set up, and there was a national writer on, and he said banks of the river were using as car parks, because that's definitely, they're beautiful spots. That should change, So again, the canopy is a big problem, like there has to be use, be it outdoor entertainment or something that can be used to draw people down to Church Street. I think some of the hospitality people would like a more streamlined process to be able to access that. I know some of them last year would have possibly used it, but it was just, the process was just they felt it was too cumbersome for them. So I think, again, by working with all the hospitality people in the area, the offering could be improved.
Thank you. Cataldo, just in relation to a point you made previously, you stated that no piece of infrastructure in and on itself is the solution to any of these issues. One of the questions in the chat is that there's a feeling that the local authority views the enhancement of Church Street as a fait accompli and sufficient in itself, and that there's a need to get that traffic out of the town, and the one-way system is not facilitating that at present. And if I can take you from there, then on to talk to us about the proposed regeneration of Sean Costello Street, which is the next phase of that streetscape enhancement.
Yeah, thank you, Tig. Probably everybody's well aware of the public realm enhancements for the Mardyke Street, Pump Lane, and Sean Costello Street. So it's proposed to upgrade the footpaths and realign the existing carriageway there along Mardyke Street, and introducing shared surfaces, and as well as the pedestrianisation of Sean Costello Street there from the junction with Pump Lane to the junction with Mardyke Street. And again, that's all about taking accounts of the pedestrian needs of people, mobility impaired people, and there will be no limited access for service vehicles. And again, it's proposed, and we're introducing public realm and landscape improvements, street furniture, play equipment, cycle parking, tree planting, soft landscape, and to enhance, the biodiversity of the area, and introduce, signalized junctions, prioritize, again, prioritizing pedestrian facilities, and as well as introducing public lighting and stuff like that to create a focal lighting on Sean Costello Street. And really I suppose in terms of consultation, we would have engaged extensively with our elected members and through our own public consultation scheme. And it is a scheme, I would have to say, that was very well endorsed, and it was received very well. But again, this is only, the implementation of these works is only the first step. It would provide great potential. I suppose somebody mentioned earlier on, it has potential to be Connacht Street or Church Street. And that really is, that's down to, I suppose, the commitment from all stakeholders, both ourselves, traders and service providers in the area. It also has the potential to be, that key street type development there. There's potential to, if successful, punch into the backlands and open covered streets, bars, restaurants, craft beer areas, so there is that potential for the vibrancy, and we're putting in, I suppose, the building blocks there to create a nice, safe, pedestrianised environment, and then it's up to everybody else to come on. But again, it is very much a shared vision, as is and should be all our future proposals. That doesn't mean that everybody's input, or everybody will be able to direct something in the way that they want to, because obviously people will have different opinions and shared opinions, but we do engage, and that perspective of the people who are on the ground is very important. And this is a very important element of that, and it will feed into the work that we'll be doing next year, towards the middle of the year, when we have our transport studies and that evidence base that we spoke about assembled. We'll be engaging, we'll be developing an issues paper to get the perspectives of all the people that are living, working and trading in Athlone, in order to inform our future plans and to get that buy-in, because really it is about community ownership, and it's the stakeholders themselves that need to take pride in their place and take responsibility to address a lot of these issues together. The local authorities are one element of that, but only one element, together with everybody else.
Yeah, when your point in relation to stakeholder involvement is echoed by somebody in our chats there, saying that when you look at the eastern side from the back of Sean's Bar, it presents a totally grey perspective. We need to colour up those buildings and make it as colourful as Clonakilty. So there is a requirement for all of us to play our part in the future development. Some very interesting points being made throughout this discussion. I would like to try and bring them together and tie the threads together as we come towards the conclusion of this. I suppose the biggest question that we've been asked to address is a future vision for these streets. And I'd like to maybe tie down individual panelists on that as to what they would like to see, what mix of uses would, a predominantly retail street, a predominantly service street, a predominantly nighttime economy street, and maybe one improvement that they feel is really, really essential. So maybe we'd start with Andrew on that. Andrew, what's your vision for the street, and give me one particular tangible thing you would like to see achieved?
I think the retail nature or historical retail use of Church Street, Mardyke Street has changed forever, and I don't see it going back. So I think we have to get on with what's coming down the track in terms of where we want to see it being. I see this being more a service-led, a retail street, with hospitality taking a lead role in terms of the uses on the street to increase dwell time, that will in turn benefit other retailers around the area. The change in retail, we have to look at the future. We can't look at what's happening now or in 5 years' time. We have to look beyond that, because sustainability is an issue, people traveling long distances, but people shopping online, all that sort of thing has changed forever. So we can already see that cars are probably going to be a thing of the past in terms of being banned from town centres. So things will change over the next 20 or 30 years, and we have to prepare ourselves for that going forward. In terms of the one thing that I would like to see in that Church Street area is a renaissance or vibrancy of the arts. So to bring in people that will and create an ambience or an atmosphere that people want to stay. Because if we can create that atmosphere and get people to stay in an area and it becomes renowned for that, then people want to come and they make their decision to come for the atmosphere and the offering that's in place. That requires bars, restaurants to play their part. Obviously the council to provide facilities to allow those artists and entertainment and festivals possibly in the town centre. So if we can get people to come, everything else will feed off that. Retail will feed off that, tourism will feed off that, extra bed nights, etc. So I really think investment in the arts in the town centre is going to benefit all of the occupiers or business users in the central area that we're talking about today.
That's a very interesting point. That's the first mention of art and culture during our discussion today, I think. Jerry, same question to you, representing the Chamber of Commerce. What vision does the Chamber have for the street, and give me one specific tangible improvement that you would like to see?
I mean, I just give you a couple of points, Tig. I suppose I think from a hospitality point of view, I think last year showed that when you had the outdoor dining, it brought people to the street. Footfall was a lot higher last year, summer, and people enjoyed it. So I think, as I said earlier, a coordinated approach with the wide footpaths in places, create a place to go for people to sit outside and eat or drink or whatever. Just another point on North Gate Street, we're centrally involved in a feasibility study which is due to complete on a co-working hub, and it's the old workhouse building there. And so again, that would be, if that comes to fruition, it's aimed at a 200 space co-working community digital hub, and the consultants are saying to us that has the potential, if it is delivered, to act as a stimulus for all that area, beside the marina, beside the greenway, close to the station. It will bring a lot of people into town. So that's another thing. And just another, there is a demand for a farmer's market in Athlone, and I know there's one or two people, but just to get a suitable location, and maybe, I'm not sure, is that plaza area, is that something that could be looked at in there or whatever? Like farmers markets are in lots of towns and they attract lots of people to town. So maybe that's something to be looked at.
Thank you, Jerry. Catalyst, similar question to you. There was a local authority official. It would be unfair to ask you for a personal opinion as to what you would like to see in the street, but maybe if you could outline to us what the council's mixed kind of zoning use of Church Street is at present, and what it might be in the next county development plan.
Yeah, well, I suppose just building on what our previous speakers have just said there, we need to be flexible and adaptive, and mindful of the change in the environment, retailing environment, work environment, and even people's expectations and needs. COVID has had an impact on the way people carry out their daily lives and how they live their lives in terms of what they expect from an outdoor environment, and the attractiveness of the spaces in which they live. So I definitely would echo that. I can see the need for town centres to reimagine themselves, to look for more experiential offers, more services that will bring people into the town, and an investment in those attractions and experiences that make a place unique, and also be mindful of the need to have a wide range of products with greater variety, and individuality, and that ties back into the the point that was made about the arts and the culture of the area. From our perspective, we're always looking to improve the urban realm and the environments, and would love to see, I suppose, maybe greater engagement with those schemes like the shopfront scheme, so that we can create and maintain a very attractive streetscape, to go hand in glove with these public realm improvements.
Thank you, Catalyst. And Tony, final word to you. I suppose maybe a similar question with a slight change. What would you like to see in Church Street in the future, but also what do you think students might like to see there?
Thank you, Tig. The streets in question, I suppose, have three of the main hotels in the town opening onto them, with the Radisson, the Prince of Wales, and the Sheraton, and also some of the best known restaurants and pubs. So they do have a strong foundation there from a hospitality perspective. But the tourism product and landscape across the world has been changing to move away from being hospitality driven to being destination and experience driven. And this experience is often around activities, which can be outdoor and sport and adventure and walking related on one side, but on the other side, they can be very much arts and culture driven. And I would very much echo the points raised by the previous panelists there, that we need to have a look at how we can integrate arts and culture and music and festivals and so on into those spaces. We only have to look at some similar sized towns in the country to see what festivals have done for them, whether it's things like the Comedy Festival in Kilkenny or what the Fla Ceol na HÉireann did for Sligo and for Ennis and so on, or even in slightly bigger cities, places like the Halloween Festival in Derry or the Markness Parades in Galway. I think we need to put a big focus on attracting that kind of level of festival into those central spaces once or twice a year. I think, to answer your question directly, students would love to see that, because they want to be somewhere where there's something to do. They study with us for 20 or 30 hours of class time per week, and then after that they need something to do in the town, and those kind of activities would be very useful. In terms of one very operational output I'd love to see as well, would be it's a decent walk from Athlone University into the town centre, and I think a very simple operational tactical thing to do would be to have free public transport going from the university right into Church Street on a very frequent basis to bring students into the town. How that could be operationalized, I don't quite know, but I think it would be something worth considering and looking at to get more of those kind of 5,000 to 6,000 students that live in our local area into the town centre on a regular basis.
Thank you, Tony. Before we wrap up, just to add a comment from one of our attendees in relation to the need for an independent retail quarter to be developed, similar to what's in place in Limerick, and to utilise local passionate retailers. And I think that's another element of the mix that could be considered. I'd like to thank all of you for attending, particularly our panelists, Andrew Carberry, Tony Johnston, Catalyst Harton and Jerry McInerney. Thanks for all our attendees. This stream will be recorded, and or is being recorded, and will be available for subsequent viewing, and will form the basis of a Chamber of Commerce submission in the future for the future development of these areas. I have to say, personally, I've come away enthused by the potential for the streets we're referring to. I think some of the ideas that have been brought forward in the discussion in relation to bringing people in from through the use of art and culture, festivals, events and so forth, to the boardwalks, to linking the Church Street through those kind of urban boulevards, pedestrianised boulevards down to the river. The creation of a vibrant service quarter, independent retailers. There's so much potential there. I think one of the key, I suppose, points that's come from this discussion is the need for this to be a community-led project. It's not simply a case of expecting the local authority or individual businesses to come up with the solutions to the problems that are currently presenting. But I think with the proper leadership and with the proper involvement of stakeholders, there really is a bright future for Church Street, Northgate Street, and Mardyke Street. It will require imagination and it will require innovation, but I think there's plenty of that available to us. So thanks again to everybody for joining. This is the first of 3 webinars, and details of the other 2 will be available subsequently. So for now, goodbye.